In this video I will teach you how to play the Italian game, and we are going to take a look at the variation where black plays his bishop to c5. The other variations for black are covered in other videos in this Italian game playlist. So, bishop to c5, and black is trying to mimic us, and we will have to break symmetry with a move like c3. And I will show you all of the most aggressive and tricky lines you can use to beat black with the Italian game. So we're going to play c3 because black cannot copy us, so we are able to create an imbalance, a difference in our positions that we will be able to use to our advantage. Because after a move like knight c3, everything would be symmetrical and this would be a rather boring game. So pawn to c3. Here there are multiple options for black. Of course, the most played move is knight to f6, developing, preparing to castle, also attacking this pawn in the center, which is currently not protected. There are also other moves from black, which I will take a look at after we take a look at this main line. So knight to f6. And we're going to strike in the center with the move d4 immediately. So d4, this attacks the bishop and also attacks the pawn. You will notice this pawn of us is still hanging, but of course black cannot capture it because otherwise they would lose the bishop. So black has to respond to this first. And basically the only way black can respond to this without immediately losing is to capture. So you will always get this line that we want. Because if black drops back, which is the only move that is sometimes tried by the black players, you can just capture here and you will see this is defended by the knight, and we are also attacking this knight. And then black can capture here on e4, but now we have this beautiful move queen to d5. And you can see we are threatening to do a checkmate, and we are also attacking this knight. So if black just castles, we can just pick up the knight and we are up a full piece. Black can of course also take here with a check. You can move up the king, and after they castle you can still win the knight. You might think, well, I lost the pawn and I lost my castling rights, but this position is still really good for white, because in many of these lines you can play for checkmating attacks. And even if black tries to stop you, for example here, bishop g5 attacking the queen, and you can even, if this checkmate doesn't work, park your bishop here and we are just going to move up the queen and then deliver this checkmate here. So that is an important pattern to recognize. For example, this variation, and then we can go for queen h6 and go for checkmate. So you will not get this a lot, but if they play a bishop to b6, just know that you can capture, and then go for this checkmate, capture, go for this checkmate, and then also develop your bishop, swing over the queen, and then go for checkmate on g7. So black will usually capture your pawn, and many players immediately recapture here, but I don't think that is the right approach, because in the end you run into this check, and also this pawn is still hanging and black can capture this. So what I like to do is to push this pawn to e5 first, and this is also winning a tempo. That means we are pushing our pawn, we are extending our center, extending our pressure, and at the same time this knight now has to move before black can do anything else. So there are a couple of options here. Basically the only move that black can use that still keeps him somewhat in the game is this counter attack with d5, which is going to be our main line that we will focus on. And many players, I think actually about 2 in every 3 games, or maybe even 3 in every 4 games, you will get them to move the knight, and if they move the knight you are always winning immediately. A popular move with the knight is knight to g4, thinking, okay, we're gonna capture back this pawn. Well, here you can of course capture in the center, we have pressure amongst this bishop, and also this pawn is now protected. Bishop check, knight c3, developing the knight, castles, castles, and you can see we have an amazing center and already 3 developed pieces, so white is definitely better here. A move like d6, and then you can play h3, and if you take a look at this knight, you will notice that it cannot go here, it cannot go here, it cannot go back, so they have to go all the way back to h6. And I would not recommend trading this. Why would you trade your bishop for this knight? This knight is silly anyways. You can just play, for example, bishop g5 attacking, and you will see we have all of these pieces out, and white will have an amazing position and is winning in all of these lines. Because we just have so much development, you can always play a move like a3, you can activate the queen, and you can go for a checkmate against the enemy king. Sometimes you also see a move like knight to e4, which is similar to the other variation. Here you can just move your bishop up, attacking both knights, and this knight is now undefended, and you will also see that the knight is already in trouble because it cannot go back. So the only option for black is to take. You can take with the king. They can play this check against you, but you can actually park your king here on g3. And this might look totally insane, but your king is completely safe here from attacks. So there's not really any problems, and you can always play h3 later if you need to. Black will take this, and you will just see that we have a devastating attack here, because we have developed all of these pieces, the bishops, the knight, the queen can come in. So this is an amazing position for white as well. Interesting to take a look at if you think you will face this variation. And sometimes black also tries to play queen to e7 here instead of instead of moving the knight, because now of course we cannot capture the knight because this pawn is pinned to our king. So you can just castle, and this renews this threat on this knight. Now black has to deal with it. Let's say they capture, because most likely they will. This is now a free pawn. You can take, and then you can pin this queen with your rook. They can always try to jump in with the knight, but you can just double up on this file, and we are winning material on every single line. The most amazing defense from black is d5, and then you can capture here with the pawn, attacking both bishop and queen, and then you can go for this variation, attacking the queen. The queen has to move, takes, and then you are winning this knight in the end as well, and black cannot castle. So interesting variations. If you want a more in-depth look at this, you can always look at the Lichess study that is available in my Discord group. So basically all this to say that black has to play d5, and he has to play along with our plan that we have, because every other variation is just losing. So d5, and then we have to move the bishop, of course, because our bishop is under attack. So we are going to move it here to b5, and here we are pinning the knight, which also helps, because now it's harder for black to capture this, and also the center is no longer defended. So what will black do? Still, of course, black cannot just capture here, because he would still be losing the knight, and this kind of renews our threat. We are still attacking this knight, and yeah, black has to do something with this. Wherever black moves the knight, we will always just capture here, and then we will get this amazing center, supported by the knight, supported by the queen, and this knight is also pinned, and this is not such a good position for black. Black also has to move this bishop. Most likely they will throw in this check, and then you can block here on d2. It's important to block here on d2 and to not play something like knight c3, because black can take, check, and as you see, you are also losing your rook. So, and the other line we played knight c3 because we could play it. Here you don't want to play knight c3. We want to play bishop d2. Bishop d2 stops the check, and also this attacks their bishop. And even though this bishop looks defended, it's actually not defended, because this knight is pinned to the enemy king. So it is possible for black to go wrong here. Again, multiple options for black. They can take here, they can take here, they can castle, but pretty much everything will lead to the same variation. I'm going to continue with the most popular move, which is taking with the knight, and then we can just recapture with our knight. So this helps us, because black played 1, 2, 3 moves with the knight, just to help us develop our knight. So that is a really good situation for white. And here most likely black will castle, we can castle. And of course this can also be achieved in a different move order, but this position that you see right now is the most important one. You should remember if you want to play this variation of the Italian game. And that is, white will end up with an amazing center, and also in many of these lines we will be able to take here on c6 with the bishop, double up pawns, and then we are going to fight against this c6 pawn, and we're going to try to pick it up by, for example, playing queen here or queen here. Both of those attack the pawn, and we're also going to activate our rooks, sometimes even double up, because we want to win a pawn in this variation and also completely destroy the queen side. So again, many options of course for black. I'm not going to cover all of them. If you want to see more of them, you can check out my Lichess study. The most popular response is bishop to g4. Bishop to g4, because this is pinning the knight, and most people with the black pieces think, okay, this is a good move, we are pinning this knight, we are attacking this knight, but actually this is not such a good move, but it is 62% of all games, this is the move that is played, so I think you will get this a lot. And I will use this to demonstrate the main IDs as well. Something else you might of course get is that they capture this earlier on, but you never have to worry, you can just capture back with the queen, castle, and all of the same IDs will still apply. And if they go for this, for example, to attack your knight. You can always take, go in with the queen, take, and you can see here we have this weak pawn we will be able to fight against. Okay, but let's continue with our line. So black plays bishop to g4, pinning this knight, and immediately you have to counterattack this with pawn to f3. Because of course you also don't want to have this knight pinned, because if this knight is pinned, at some point black might be able to capture here in the center. If you play just a random move, for example, black can always capture here and has more pressure on your position as well. So you want to immediately resolve the situation, so we're going to play h3. Well, there are two options from black. The most played and the best option is just to move back with the bishop, because black still has the pin and they are still threatening to capture here. If they just exchange, of course we can take with the knight. Again, a really strong center, all of this is defended. You will get something like a6, and this is one of those lines where you can win a pawn. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight, and then queen a4. And you can see we are attacking the bishop, and we're also attacking this pawn. So it's just impossible. Black has to move this somewhere, for example here, and then you can take this pawn for free. Also activate the rooks and just go for a queenside attack here. If black tries to defend the bishop, of course we can take here as well. And if they try to play c5 because they think, well, this both defends the bishop and also saves my pawn, well, you can just play this move a3. a3 attacking the bishop. The bishop has to go back, and as you will see, the bishop is actually trapped, so they will have to sacrifice this bishop. And that is if they capture your knight on f3 with their bishop. Of course, they don't have to capture, they can also go back, which is the most played move. Still, they are trying to do this threat against your center. And here you can play captures and then queen c2. Queen a4 doesn't work here because of c5, and here a3 doesn't work because black can capture your knight. So that is why we play queen c2 with the same idea, trying to win this pawn. And it's really hard to defend this. As black, of course, if you push it, we can just take this and they cannot recapture this. They would be losing the bishop. So they will probably have to defend with the queen, most likely. And then we can activate the rook, and you can see we have double pressure on this pawn. And there's not really any way for white to add an extra defender. So this is already a position where white is going to lose, or black is going to lose a pawn. The best option from black is trying to go for a counterattack, because I would not recommend capturing this straight away, because you could get something like this, and then in the end you're also losing this pawn, and your knight is under attack. So this is a sneaky counterattack from black, trying to make sure they get that position. So definitely be patient in this line. You have to be patient and play something like a pawn to a3, kicking out this bishop. They can trade, for example. They can move the bishop, attack your queen. It doesn't really matter, we just want to stay on this file because we are still trying to win this pawn. And you can just keep playing moves to try and win this pawn. Rook here, and again, we can take this, but we would just get this exchange, and then this knight is also under attack. So we don't want this. We're going to play b4. And now because of a3 and b4, you will see we don't have a weakness on the b file anymore. This rook is kind of useless at this point. And then we are still threatening to capture this, but black can always defend with rook to b6. And if black plays everything in the order I just showed you, they will be able to prevent losing this pawn, but black is already completely lost in this position, because strategically, if you look at this from the black side, this rook is defensive and passive, so is this queen. This rook is never going to do anything. This bishop is looking at nothing. All of the black pieces are useless, and we can now let this be, and we will be able to start a kingside attack. So, for example, first knight here, because we want to activate our knight into this beautiful square on c5. The knight goes here. Of course, if they don't move the queen, it's the same. We can still play the knight there, and they would have to move the queen. And then, let's say black goes here. Now we're going to start our attack. Of course, if black doesn't go here and black just plays passive moves, you can also play f4, even if the queen is not here. So f4, queen h4, and then f5. We are attacking this bishop. Bishop has to go. And we would love to play this move g4 here. And you can play this, but this is a little bit annoying because you can get checks with your king. You would have to go here. This is playable if you want. But you can also be a little bit more patient, because we have this anyways. and play a different move. For example, like rook here, because in this variation, after all of this, you are also able to activate your rook. So you most likely will be able to win the bishop in this line, and in most of those lines you will also be able to go for checkmate, because you just double up on the g file, you can jump in with the knight, you can push these pawns, and you are winning in every variation. This is just one example where we go for checkmate, and then we push, we're just trying to break this open, and if black defends here, you can even trap the enemy queen. So that is the main line ID against bishop c5 in the Italian game, but there are also other options black can play. So we took a look at what to do if black plays knight to f6, but of course there are other options. d6 and h6, those are the other options you will probably get. Sometimes, I think almost every time, you will get knight f6, sometimes d6, and very rare is this move h6. So if they play d6, this is just worse for black. This is worse than our other line, because we immediately have d4, we have this, they can give us the check, but we can just go in with the knight and this knight on c3. And as you can see, we have a beautiful center, well-developed pieces, and we will be able to start a kingside attack soon. Let's say bishop g4, that's the most played move. We can castle, knight f6, and this line, even though everything looks pretty much the same here, white is already completely winning again with a move like knight d5. And knight d5 is really tricky because we are threatening to take here, we could potentially take here, and with queen a4 in many lines we are winning a piece. Black has multiple options. For example, they can castle, but then we can pin this, and black is just going to be in a lot of trouble. If they capture, we can recapture with the queen. If they capture here, we can capture with the bishop. And in many lines, you will have tricks. For example, with queen b3, putting a lot of pressure on this f7 pawn. And of course, other variations here are possible as well. There are more lines in my lead chess study, but as I said, if they develop the knight, you can pin it. If they capture, you can retake. There's literally nothing that black can do that helps him. So I like to go for this variation and then double up and put more pressure here on this f7 pawn. And again, in some variations, we can even win this dark squared bishop. This is already really tricky from black, because if black just plays any move, here we would be able to take this. If black, for example, develops the queen, you can just take the knight, take, and win this bishop. And that is the main threat against these d6 lines. You will usually be able to try and win one of these pieces. So black can try to defend with the rook, and this is a really special defense. I think many players will miss this, but this is a very special defense because now all of a sudden this bishop is protected. So I would recommend move the queen, and now we are threatening to take, and then in some lines you can also win a pawn, but we're also setting up a beautiful trap here. Yeah, for example, knight takes is possible, but let's say black plays just a generic move. Here we have this move a3, a3 attacking the bishop, and the bishop basically has nowhere they can go. They can go here to a5, but then we can go takes, takes, and win the bishop. So in many of these lines, we will be able to win this bishop if they go for this d6 variation. If they see this, they can always choose to go for knight takes here. This also sacrifices the bishop, but then black could try to do some counterplay, for example knight c1, queen here, they take the rook. But you will see we are going to win this knight back, and then we have two bishops versus a rook. So this is still winning for white. And that's the main idea to keep in mind against pawn to d6. You want to try and win one of these pieces. Most likely you are going to try to win this dark squared bishop. And the last variation is what to do if they play this early h6. Again, in many of these lines you can actually play d4 if you want to. So you could always go for just this. And then this is very similar to what we have seen before, and you can even start kicking these knights around and winning some tempi. But against h6 specifically, you also have this really nice move, pawn to b4, and that is something you don't get a lot in the Italian game. Attacking this bishop and then pawn to b5, kicking away this knight, and then bam, we have the sacrifice here on f7, and you can really surprise your opponents with this. They take, we take the pawn, they have to go to the center, we can develop the queen, and this is something like a fried liver attack. It's pretty similar. They tried to avoid it with the move h6, and then we were still able to do it in this way. And white is winning in every single variation, but only play this if you are someone that is good at tactics or if you want to get better at tactics. Otherwise, if you want to be more strategic, you can always play pawn to d4 and then go for this variation. And most likely they will have to play something like d6 here before developing the knight, because they don't want you to be able to push this. Then you can push here, and yeah, this is already pretty annoying. This loses the bishop even. So here black is also just losing material on every line, because d5 is not possible, and if they play this they can get kicked around. If they play d6, you can always play this here, or you can castle and then play this here, and it's just terrible for black on every line. They will almost always lose some material, for example, in this variation. So that is how you can destroy them if they play h6. I will show you two really interesting variations you should consider playing if you're playing the Italian game and you get this setup, which is also known as the Giuoco Pianissimo. And this is when black plays the bishop to c5 and also the knight to f6. So this video is part of my series on the Italian game. So the Italian game is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then we play c4, the Italian game. If black plays bishop c5 immediately, you can always go for d3, knight f6, and then you will also have this position. But against bishop c5 I have some other interesting lines. So we are going to transpose into this position after we play these moves, knight f6 from black, and then we're going to play d3 with white. And most people with the black pieces will play bishop to c5. There are some other options which I will take a look at in different videos, but bishop to c5. So this is our main starting position, and I will show you two really interesting ways of playing here. So many players here immediately castle. We are not going to do that. We are going to play bishop to e3. And here there are two different approaches and two different types of games we can get. So the most played line, which you will get the most, is black will capture your bishop, which is what we want. That is the most tactical and attacking variation for us. And then the second most played move is what to do if black plays the bishop back to b6. And that is a really strategic game where we are going to go into a winning endgame position for white. So first we're going to take a look at what to do if black captures. We're going to capture back with the pawn, and the main idea here is that we wanted to open up this f-file. And this game is a really beautiful lesson in how to use open files with your rooks and how to fight against a pawn weakness. And we're going to try to fight against this f7 pawn here. So usually black will castle, white will castle. Of course black can also play a move like d6 first, but this will most likely transpose. At some point they will castle, and you will see that we do have pressure here against this f7 pawn, and here d6 from black. But as I said, the order can also be reversed. And many of these lines I recommend playing an early a3, because basically you don't want to have to trade your bishop. Your bishop is a really good attacking piece and you don't want to trade here. Of course here black will not play this because we can always capture here, and that also defends the bishop and wins a pawn. But after a move like d6, if you are not careful, black could try to capture your bishop. So that's why we play e3, and of course if black attacks us we can go all the way back and we can still keep an eye on this f7 square with the knight, with the bishop. Okay, so a move you will see a lot from black is bishop g4. We also allowed this. We didn't play h3 on purpose because we wanted to allow black to play this, since it doesn't really matter. And then we are going to play h3 here. And the reason why is this bishop can actually be a key defender and some variations. If black plays a move like bishop e6, well, it's already a little bit harder to fight against this weakness. I would recommend not capturing, because you are just creating a really identical position, and that's not what we want. If black plays bishop e6, we want to play knight to d2, and in many lines you will get takes with the knight, and then still you can see we have an imbalance here, meaning our position is different from our opponent's position, and that's really important because it's mainly in those lines that you will be able to fight for an advantage. And here we have an extra pawn in the center, and we also have this file to work with. But I think you won't get this a lot. Most of the time, since we are allowing this, you will probably get a move like bishop g4. And after they play this, we're going to play this move h3, and we are inviting black to capture our knight. If black captures our knight, we're going to recapture with the queen, and this just helps because now we have two pieces fighting against this f7 pawn, and also the light squared bishop from black is gone. Of course, black doesn't have to capture. They can always decide to go back, which I don't think you will see a lot, or they can decide to play bishop to h5, which is the most played line, but this is a pretty bad line for black, because if they play this, you can immediately strike here with pawn to g4, and then they will have to move the bishop back to g6, and then we can play the knight here, and our goal is just going to be to trade off this bishop. And then this bishop is gone, this key defender. At the same time, we also still have this open file for the rook. We still have the pressure here. And many lines will have queen f3 as well. We'll activate the knight and put it here on d5. So this is a worse variation for black. So black will usually capture. We can recapture. And as I said, really keep an eye on this f7 pawn. That is going to be the entire plan for white here. I'm just going to take a look at the black position. And then if you take a look at this, you will see that, well, black cannot push in the center. Black will probably not start pushing on the king side. That would just be devastating since we already have so much pressure. So the only real plan for black is to try and go for some kind of a queen side attack. And we're going to let them do this. If they want to, they can always do this. We already created this square for the bishop. So we are fine here. And again, looking at this from the black side, it's hard. You can always try to continue the attack. But still, this pawn and this knight is also stopping some potential moves from black. A move like a queen d7 you will often get in these variations. Maybe here, maybe a little bit earlier. All of that is possible. And then here, again, we want to put more pressure on this f7 pawn. And there's no immediate way of doing this, but we still have this rook on a1 that is not participating in the game. So I would recommend to play rook f2, and we are just going to double up on the open file, which is a really principal approach. We have an open file, so we're going to double up and try to put as much pressure as we can here on this pawn. Again, black has to do something. I'm not saying these are all the optimal moves from black. They can always push a rook, but nothing really matters. I'm going to say they play knight e7, which is a top engine move. Also because then they can play the c5, and also the knight can sometimes be a defender here on g6. So we're going to double up. c6 as a move from black. Again, other moves are possible. c5 is possible as well. c6 is good because it stops us from jumping in with the knight, which is sometimes we would otherwise do. If you get something like c5, you can actually start attacking here immediately on the king side. For example, pawn to g4, and let's say they play h6 because they want to stop you. Well, the funny thing is you can actually still push this, and after they capture, you can now fight against this weakness here on g5, and it's almost impossible to defend this from the black side. We are going to be able to activate all of our pieces here, and there is basically a checkmate in every single line. It's hard to even find a move from black. I'm just going to play something. We can take here again. Black has to do something. For example, knight here. We can put the queen on h5. If they ever try to play a move like g6, well, we now have a sacrifice here with the rook, so that also doesn't work. If they just bounce around with the knight in many lines, you can actually sacrifice. And then you could play something like knight d5, or you could even try to swing over this rook. And this is all really devastating for black. So this g4 idea is something you can sometimes play depending on what black does. If black is a little bit safe, for example with a move like c6, we can still play this move g4, but here we cannot jump in with the knight, so that is a small difference here. For example h6, and then again multiple options. You can just push g5, but you can also always put your rook here on the g file and support this push. Because as white, we have a lot of time in these kinds of positions. We don't have to rush anything. We can just go for the build-up and keep building up the attack. And that's an important thing in these positions. Don't be too aggressive and don't try to immediately go all in and exchange pieces, because your attack will slow down. It is best to keep activating pieces, putting them in better positions, and do a more slow build-up, since black just doesn't have any good moves. Here with black, I'm playing the move d5. Again, you can play different moves, but it's all pretty hard to defend. Capture, capture, and then a g5 here, for example. You could have also played g5 earlier. Pawn takes, rook takes. For example, knight h7, we can just go back. And these are similar positions to what we have seen before. White just has a devastating attack here, and black is already losing in every single line. Maybe you move like g6 trying to defend, but you also have to keep in mind that there are many sacrifices in these kinds of positions. Here we can take with the queen on e5, for example f6, queen can go back, king here, h4, and black does survive in some of these lines. For example, here black is not immediately losing yet, even though we are already at move 24, but you can see black is really on the defensive here, and I won't show you all of these variations. You will just have to play these and figure out yourself what to do, and it's important that you're actually good at attacking and tactical play if you want to play this variation. So definitely work on that as well, because here there are so many tricks for white with pushing h5, sometimes with rook sacrifices, sometimes you will be able to capture here or play e4 as well. And many of these lines will actually play e4 because we want to open up this. And white is just winning in every single variation with beautiful checkmates. Then the next thing I wanted to take a look at is if we get this exact same position. Of course, if white captures, we already know we are going to go for this f-file battle. Black can also drop back. So black can also choose to play bishop to b6, which is the second most played move. There's pretty much not anything else. I'm going to show you some small variations for black as well in the end, but bishop b6 is like the only real alternative move. And here I will show you something really beautiful that you can go for, but you have to decide for yourself if this is something you want to play or not, but I would recommend playing this. So we're going to play bishop takes. So we are going to take, and our goal is to damage the black pawn structure as much as we can. So here we already gave black the doubled pawns. Then we're going to play knight c3. Again, you can also castle here, that's fine, but I would say develop the knight first. And black can either castle or play d6, it doesn't matter. I'm going to show you d6 first. And if they play d6, in many of these lines they want to play bishop g4. So we are going to play h3 first. Of course, if they castle, you can also play h3, and you will just get a transposition to this. So h3, and then here black will most likely castle or play bishop e6. If they castle, we are just going to castle, and then again the most played move by black is bishop e6 in these lines. But I'm going to look at bishop e6 first, and here we are going to do something quite crazy. We are going to trade again. And if you take a look at this, you can see the black pawn structure is actually not so good. Black has two doubled pawns, and there are also two open files. And you will also see why we did not castle any earlier. This was a little trick that we played in this position. Here, black is most likely going to want to castle on the next move, and we're going to play knight to g5. And our plan here with knight to g5 is to attack this weakness, because now this is a weak pawn in the black camp. Of course, black can protect this with something like queen e7 or queen d7. Both are pretty similar. And then we are going to jump forward with this knight as well, knight to b5. And this variation is very beautiful because this is actually kind of forced, because you can always take here yourself, and many black players will play the bishop to e6 and allow you to capture there. And if you do, you will be able to damage their pawn structure. So this variation that you see here is the most played variation that you will get. And then at some point here, black is going to castle, and then we have a beautiful trick here. We can play knight takes e6, and we are sacrificing the knight for a pawn. And if black captures this, we can play knight takes c7 with a fork on the queen and the rook. The queen can move, and then we play knight takes rook and rook takes knight. And if you take a look at this position, you will see that we basically gave black two knights in exchange for our rook. So black has two knights in exchange for a rook. And we are also up a pawn. And this is a really interesting position because, as I said, this is really forced, and you will get into an early endgame with this. And the endgame is better for white. Here you can castle, and castling is also a small trap, quote unquote trap, because black will probably just capture this for free, which is of course a decent move by black. Now black has equalized on the pawn, but that is what we wanted, because now we can trade, we can activate the queen. And again, black doesn't have to trade here, but I think most people with the black pieces will trade. And then you can get an endgame like this. And even if you get something that is familiar to this, the entire goal with this variation of the opening is just to go for an early endgame and have this rook versus two knights situation. With or without queens, or with or without a second pair of rooks, it doesn't really matter. We want to go into this endgame and exchange as much as possible. And this is a really interesting position, especially if you're also someone that is wanting to work on their endgame skills. I would definitely recommend playing this, because now you will have to navigate how to play rook versus two knights. But here we have the big advantage that this black pawn structure is just terrible, and at the same time this white pawn structure is really beautiful and solid. And if you want to win this endgame, of course there are a trillion different variations that you can have. But if you want to win this, there are a couple of important things to keep in mind as white. The main thing is we want to keep our pawns very solid, so we don't want to just randomly push pawns and create weaknesses. Also, we want to play this move f3 and then get our king here to the center, because the winning plan for white will consist of creating a passed pawn here in the center, which we can do because we have a 3 versus 2 situation, so we can create a passed pawn here. For example, black can play something like knight d4, which is always possible, but in many of these lines you want to play c3 anyways. That is a pawn push you can do and create this kind of structure, which is really solid, and it's going to be hard for black to fight this. Rook check, for example, always good activating the rook on this open file. And even if there is no check, even if they move the king earlier, let's say they move the king here, you can actually still activate your rook here. So many of these lines will transpose. So let's say this variation, and then we're going to play f3, and this is the pawn structure you have to keep in mind. And once we have this, we are going to leave the pawns like this for a while, and we are first going to activate the king. So we're going to come up, black and push here. They don't have to push, of course, but if you think about this from the black side, black will want to do something. Black has to do something. So this is probably not something they want to push, because if they start pushing this, it's all going to fall because this rook will be too strong. This push seems logical, and pushing on the king side is actually really bad for black as well. So they can push, we don't have to capture, we can just go in with the king, because of course if they capture us, we can take with the pawn, and you will see that we can create a passed pawn here. So if they take, we take. If they don't capture us, they are also in trouble. But again, if you look at it, it's really hard to find any moves from black. Let's just say they make a random move. You will be able to push d4. And then, for example, this variation. I'm just going to show you this, and you can see we have the passed pawns, and white is winning in these lines. So let's say they take immediately, we play this, and then black will have to do something, and black will try to push somewhere or create some type of threat. And we are always going to go for this passed pawn. So for example, d4, and black can take this, but taking it is just terrible for black. I think many people will take this, but this is just terrible, because now you have 2 pawns, you can keep marching them up the board, and also your rook will be able to attack this, your rook will be able to attack this, here as well, and white is just winning in every single line. If black is a little bit more careful and they don't capture, for example, they move the king, but again, it's really hard, almost every move is losing for black. You can even play this move b4 here. And basically we are trying to bait black into this variation. And if they capture this pawn for free, of course, here we have this check. So after this, black will have to move the king somewhere, and then you can just play b5. The knight has to move, for example, knight back. Rook can attack this pawn, and here again you have 2 extra pawns. Also in this variation, if black pushes b5, for example, you can push here with the pawn, and then you can start activating the rook. And here white is also winning, for example in this variation, attacking the knight, attacking this, picking up the pawn, and white is winning. So I think this is a really interesting line to go for if you want to practice your endgame and also get a winning endgame position as white. And here in this position, this is the last thing I want to take a look at. So if they capture you, we have this f-file attack. If they go back, we can go for this endgame and all of these trades. What else can they do? Well, not much. I think d6 is like the only line you will sometimes see. And here we are just going to capture this, because this is not so good for black. And you can even play bishop here, pinning this knight. And white is already winning. It's interesting to analyze these lines. I will put these in the Lichess study as well. For example, here you can capture, and then win this pawn. So the d6 line really is not so good for black. Maybe if they realize that this is under attack, they can try to defend it, but then we can give them tripled pawns. And this is going to be strategically so bad that the black will always be losing. And again, nothing else is really possible here. Maybe they can give you a check, but then you can always play c3, and this is also not so good. The bishop has to go back, probably here to a5, and then again in many of these lines we are going to put pressure here, and try to win this pawn, and sometimes even go for a full queenside expansion. So this bishop b4 is also not so good. Maybe queen e7 is something that can be tried, but again, you can just play a normal situation, and in many of these lines they will actually capture here and still allow you to go for this, or they will still drop back, and if they drop back, you can always still go for that line with captures as we have seen before. So nothing that black does can really stop you. You just have to know the two main plans for what to do if they capture and what to do if they drop back. In this video I will show you my favorite way of dealing with the Paris defense, and the Paris defense is when black plays this early d6 against your Italian game. So we get to this position after e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop c4, and then black plays d6. One of the more passive approaches, but you still will see this a lot when you are playing, especially online. So let me show you how I would deal with this. So in this position there are many legal moves for white, but I would go with castles first. This is just a principal move. We develop two pieces, put a pawn in the center, we're gonna castle, sticking to the basic opening principles. And we are also, in a way, setting up a trap here. Then it is black to move, and here of course there are many different options for black. The most played variation is bishop g4, pinning this knight. Another really popular line is knight f6. There's also bishop e7 here, and also bishop e6. So we're going to take a look at all of them. But first, bishop g4. So there are 4 variations in total. This is our first variation. So black tries to pin this knight to our queen, and in some variations black will also try to jump in with their knight and create a double attack on our knight. I would personally recommend in this position to play this move c3, and there is a really nice ID after playing c3. But I also wanted to show you that if you are someone who loves opening traps and playing tricky against this bishop g4, you can also play the move knight to c3. And this is if you are someone who loves setting up traps. I would not personally recommend this, because if black plays perfectly, this is going to be more drawish, because we can no longer put the pawn here on c3. But if you're someone who likes traps, you can always try this. And the main trap here is that most players with black will play knight to d4. And they will play knight to d4 simply because this was their entire plan. They want to attack you twice here on f3. And here black already fell for a trap, because we have knight takes e5. Knight takes e5, and if black captures the queen, which is the most played move, there's actually a famous checkmate, legal checkmate, which is bishop takes f7 check, king is forced to go up, and then knight goes here, and this is actually a checkmate because of all of these squares are covered and our bishop is also protected. So this is a checkmate. If black sees this and they try to do something else, for example, they realize I cannot capture this, I will capture the knight. Well, here you can just capture the bishop, and here you also won material. You won a pawn in this variation. Also, you have 3 developed pieces. What is this knight doing here? So that is possible. But if black plays this well, for example, with a move like knight f6, which is the second most popular. The most popular is actually black falling for this trap. This is the second most popular. Here, this is going to be a bit more drawish. So that is why I recommend going for this move c3 and not playing for the trap. But it's up to you to decide. Knight f6, and then we're going to go with d4. So we are immediately going to go for a full central. That is why we pushed pawn to c3, because we want to support this and go for a central push. Of course, you can always say, does black have to play knight f6? No, they can also capture here, but then you capture back with the queen. They can play something like knight here to attack this weak pawn. And I would not defend this with the pawn. I would just play rook up here to d1, and then we're going to push this eventually. So that's fine. Knight f6 we're going to take a look at. Sometimes you will see queen f6, which I think is a good and tricky approach by black. Queen f6 trying to put double pressure here on this knight. So right now black is actually threatening, if I just make a random move, black is actually threatening to take this and destroy our pawn structure, which is not necessarily super bad, but it is a possibility. Against this, I would just recommend dropping back with the bishop. And then most likely black will castle queenside, which is not a good move. And then you can play pawn d3, bishop here, and you can just start a full-on queenside attack. that was just quickly to show you those variations, but most of the time probably you will see this move knight to f6. So knight to f6, and here we're gonna play d4. So we are setting up some tricks here as white, but these are really decent tricks. Even if black doesn't fall for them, we always have a good position. So there are a couple of things here. First off, you will notice that this e4 pawn is not protected. So black could technically just snatch this pawn for free straight up, which is the most played move in this position. Black could also capture in the center, and then they can still capture this free pawn if they want to. So they can capture in the center, they can still capture this free pawn, or they can play bishop e7. So a couple of different variations here. I'm going to take a look first at what if they capture this pawn. So if they capture this pawn for free, which is the most played, we are going to play rook to e1. And the goal is to get the rook on the same file as the enemy king. So we could potentially have some tricks here. The knight also has to move. So probably knight back to f6. It's also possible they capture here, but that's not really a problem. You can capture back with the queen. So knight to f6. And then we can play queen to b3. And now this is already problematic and basically borderline losing for black, because we have double pressure here on this f7 pawn, and black has to defend this. Many players with black actually capture here and many of these variations as well, but then there is just a checkmate here. With bishop takes, king is forced to go up, and then queen checkmate. If black defends, for example, with a move like queen d7, now you can take here in the center. Let's say black takes here, and then we can take with the knight. We are attacking the bishop, we are attacking the knight, we are attacking the queen. So this is pretty annoying for black. If black takes this with the knight, bam, we can go in with the rook. Rook gives a check. Probably something like bishop here to e6, and then the queen can capture here to win this pawn, potentially win this rook. Or you could also first play knight d2, because of course black can also go in with the queen. Here black can go in with the queen as well, but we can always block with the bishop, and if they capture this bishop, we can capture this rook. So pretty tactical lines, but all of these are really bad for black. Of course, king is still stuck in the center. We have all this pressure, developed pieces. There are many different lines, but all of them are pretty devastating for black. So it's not that good as black to capture here on e4. What you also, and capturing on e4, by the way, is the most played variation. Also, capturing here on d4 is something you will get a lot. Then you can just capture. Of course, capturing this is really bad, because now we got rook e1, and this knight is pinned to the enemy king. The best defense is probably something like pawn to d5, because this both defends the knight and also attacks our bishop. But then we have this move knight to c3. And of course, if they capture this bishop, we can capture with the rook. That's a check, and we're also picking up this. Unless if they block with the bishop, but then we have d5, and we are also winning material. So crazy lines in every single variation. Yeah, if they capture here, of course, we can still capture. There's still a lot of pressure here on this. If they ever capture the bishop, we take with check. So these lines are really tactical, and there are many different variations, but the main thing you need to know is that capturing this free pawn is basically never really good for black. Capturing here is not so good, and capturing here is even worse, because this is already completely opened up, and we can immediately pin the knight. So some interesting lines. There are some other lines as well, but I'll put those in the Lichess study for you to take a look at after watching the video. So the most popular line is captures, captures, and then here it's best for black to play a move like bishop e7, or maybe even capturing here, which is really popular. So many people with the black pieces will always capture here. And against those lines, I actually recommend taking back with your g-pawn. Because in many of these variations, if you take back with your queen, at some point you might be dropping this pawn here on d4, and black can capture this. And I'm not saying this is terrible for white, but we're kind of losing our edge, we're kind of losing our attacking chances. So if black ever captures on f3 and threatens to win this for free after you recapture with the queen, the goal is just to capture with the g-pawn. And this might look completely strange to you, but you have to realize we have an incredibly strong center. We already have this bishop developed, and this open file is actually not a weakness, it is a strength, because we're gonna put the king in the corner, and then also put this rook here on the g file. And this is going to have a lot of pressure against the enemy position. And black basically, because of his orientation of the pieces, has no way of attacking our king. You will see this knight cannot come in. This queen is blocked by the knight, and even if the queen goes here, there's nothing she can do. This knight has no way of getting to us. Our center is just too solid. This bishop is still stuck, so black cannot punish us for creating this weakness. And that's why this weakness here is actually not a weakness but a strength, since we will be able to put a rook here. Let's say bishop e7. We can just do normal developing moves. You don't have to rush with the king here. You can just play normal developing moves. We get an extra knight in the center, and our center is just so beautiful, so strong. White is basically winning in every single line. Castles, and then we can put the king into the corner. Let's say they develop the queen, and then you can put the rook here. So that's the way I would recommend playing. Always play knight c3 first, and then put your king and rook like this. And here we already have pressure. Let's say black is trying to get in with the queen, trying to prove that we have some sort of weakness. But you will see there's basically no weakness. This is protected, this is protected. The knight cannot come in, there's nothing black can do. And you can even play a move like rook g3, and that chases away the queen. So black either has to go back completely, or they have to go back to h5, which is the most popular line, trying to keep an eye on this pawn. Then you can just develop the bishop to the center, pawn to a6. Again, really hard to find good moves for black. Queen here, and we can even double up, and now we are immediately threatening to capture this g7 pawn. So black probably has to push. Going back with the queen is not possible because our bishop would capture, so probably pushing is the only option for black. And then you can even play queen to g2, and then we can triple stack on this file, and we can also play rook h3. So for example, after b5, bishop back, black's trying to capture this bishop, and then rook h3, and we are just winning a free queen in this position because the queen is completely trapped. And that is just one line. The main thing I want to show you is that if you get this variation, of course you will have a really strong center, and you will have all of these ideas. It will always be different depending on what black plays, but you just have to keep these general ideas in mind and you will be fine. Of course, also black doesn't have to capture here. Most of the time they will at some point, but they don't have to capture here. Let's say for example they play bishop e7, which is also possible, but I would recommend to just play it chill. Just play something like knight c3. If they castle, you can let them castle. You can play rook e1, and I would, for the longest time possible, still let them think that they have this trick. For as long as you possibly can, let them think they have this trick. So don't play something like bishop e3 here, defending. Just let black think they have this, and eventually they will probably capture here, and then you can capture with the g-pawn and you get this structure. And if black really doesn't want to capture this, for example, here we play rook e1, and then black plays something like a6, we can play a3. Again, I would not recommend playing this. Let's say b5, you can go back with the bishop, probably a2 immediately. Again, at some point, black will capture this. It's too tempting to not to capture this, but if they really don't want to capture this, of course, at some point, you can always play bishop to e3 and just protect this. And you are also completely fine in those positions. The next thing we will look at is this variation. So again, our Paris defense, but here what to do if black plays the immediate knight f6 instead of going for bishop to g5, because bishop to g4. Bishop to g4 is actually not necessarily the best variation, as we have just seen. So let's take a look at knight f6. Against knight f6, you can basically immediately go for this move knight to g5. And you can see we have this basic plan in the Italian game here, where we can do a fork on this square. So for example, if they play a random move like bishop here, we can do this fork on the queen and the rook. And we can only do this, of course, because black blocked his own queen, and now we have this square for the knight. If the knight is not here and the queen is attacking the square, that's not possible unless if you can activate your bishop. So here we can immediately go for it, and in this position it's already quite hard for white to defend from this. There are two variations basically which kind of defend the position. That is bishop e6, trying to take away this diagonal, and also d5. I think d5 is probably the best approach, but we're going to take a look at bishop e6 first. So if they play bishop e6, you can take this with the knight and take this with the bishop. And that's already a free pawn, plus it's hard for black to castle in these positions because we have our bishop here. We are also giving them this pawn, so basically it's equal at this point. But we can play a move like d3, chase away the knight, drop back with the bishop to a really centralized position, still keeping an eye on this square. And then again, it's hard to play this from the black side. Let's say you try to develop your bishop, just a move, not necessarily the best move. And then you will see, well, there's no way for black to castle. So probably they have to play something like queen here, bishop here. Maybe they will castle queen side, but that's also not necessarily so good because we will have an easy time attacking them here on the queen side. So I don't think bishop e6 is a good defense from black. Pawn to d5 is also possible, but it's really tricky because you can capture this as white. And basically, black cannot take this pawn with their knight. That's just not a good move. And it is the most played move. 75% of games here, black took this. And this is immediately losing because of a beautiful tactic. Knight takes f7, forking queen and rook. And if the king takes, queen f3, giving a check and also attacking this knight. The king has to move, we can win this knight. If the king goes here, trying to protect his knight, that's just really bad because we have knight to c3 and this is attacking the knight once more. Let's say maybe knight to d4, they are trying to do some tricks. Well, there are multiple lines, but you can just take this with check. The king has to go somewhere and then for example here check. The king has to go here and then this is a checkmate. And there are many different lines here, but every line is just devastating for black. So black cannot capture this. So bishop e6 is bad. This is good, but black cannot capture this, and most people go wrong and they capture this. The best approach from black is probably knight a5 attacking this bishop, and they only play this d5 pawn takes just to block this diagonal. And then you can give a check. Again, annoying to play this from the black side. You probably have to play c6 takes. You don't really want to capture this with the knight because, well, white can just set up this this threat once more, even though this is actually played sometimes, so you can just remember to set up the threat again. But black will probably take with this pawn, and now you have this crazy situation, the knight's here on the rim defending this, the bishop cannot capture this. But in those lines you can actually drop back. Bishop e2 is possible, but I also think bishop d3 is a fine move here, and you will see why in a moment, because basically we will want to reroute with his knight. Because this defense from black is the perfect way of stopping our tactics. And if they ever play h6, you want to be able to go back with your knight here or here. But for example, here h6, you can go back to e4, and if they capture, you can now take with the bishop. And in this variation, yes, black is able to protect from our threat. So we didn't get any crazy tactic. But at the same time, black also has a really terrible position. Since this pawn is really weak, this queen side has been completely destroyed. White is also up a pawn, so not that good from black. Just going to show you a variation. Bishop there, d3, knight develops. And it's actually interesting to go for knight d2 here. The main idea is you probably are going to get attacked by f5, and then you want to go back with the bishop to f3. And having the knight here, having the knight here helps to stop this e4 push from black. And then you can just play b3 and develop the bishop here. So that is interesting, because if you don't know this and you go for a line like knight here, sometimes it can be annoying. f5, bishop here, and then some variations this push, or even other lines. So I would recommend going for the variation with knight d2. Then we're going to take a look at two more variations that are interesting, and that is what if white immediately plays this bishop to e6 here in this mainline position. I would recommend just capturing it. This already creates some type of weak pawn here, and then we're going to play rook to e1. You can of course say, well, why would you not develop? But you will soon see rook to e1 is a really good move here, because after knight f6, c3, the goal is basically to go for a really quick push here in the center. And if you develop, again, you don't want to play this, you are blocking your own chances of playing pawn to c3. If you play something like d3, you are just too slow, because we want to play an aggressive move. and immediately d4 is actually not that good in this line. So that is why I like to go for rook here first, defending this pawn, and then c3. And now, of course, black cannot capture this. This is defended. Let's say bishop e7, and boom, we play d4. And we're going to play aggressive for the center. Takes. We already have a good central control. Castles, knight in, and you can see things look pretty similar, but it's white who has more space and more activity because of the placement of our pawns, and also this queen and rook are already working together here. And then black has many different moves in these positions, and d5 and e5, these two pushes, are the most played because black wants to fight back against our center, and both of these pushes are not that good. So we're gonna take a look at them. I'm gonna take a look actually at e5 first, because e5 is the worst push. So e5, challenging our pawn, and we're gonna play pawn to d5, attacking this knight. And if you take a look at this knight doesn't really have any good squares. Actually, knight b8 is the best move. Going back, going in is not so good, of course. Takes, and we win a pawn. And going here is not that useful, because the knight from here doesn't really have a future, and it can also be attacked by h3. And then after it gets attacked by h3, it probably has to go back here all the way to the side. And white is just gonna play knight g5 and then jump in, and if we were able to get here, we would also have a fork. So probably black wants to move the queen, and then black also has to move the rook, maybe here. But this is already a really strong knight, and we are in a winning position here as white. Strategically, of course, you still have to play this out, but strategically we are winning, and we can even break open the center at some point with a move like f4 as well. So not really a good line for black. Pawn to d5 is also often played, but then you can just play knight g5 immediately, attacking this weakness. Again, we are threatening to do a fork, so probably the queen has to move, and then you can just take this pawn on e6, and that is amazing. And this is where many players go wrong as black. They push this, and then they didn't anticipate knight g5, and they think, well, I can just defend this, but you can just capture this with the knight. And if the queen takes, we're gonna take here with the pawn. And of course, this is a discovered attack on the queen, and also a double attack on the queen and on the knight. So the queen has to move in this line. Let's say queen f7, top engine choice as well. But then we can take here, black takes, and we also won a pawn and also destroyed this position from black, and then we have these active pieces as well. So that is how you can play this variation. Of course, here, as I said, both of these pawn pushes are bad for black, but they don't need to push this. But again, if they don't push this, what are you going to do as black? Are you going to play something like a6 and be passive? That's possible, but still, we have pawn to d5. If they push, that's, of course, losing the knight. If they move the knight, that's losing this pawn. So they are basically forced to capture. We can capture. And then in these lines, we're going to try and jump in here with the knight as well. If black plays something like knight here, you can win a pawn, but you just can also go here and then jump into e6. So jumping into e6 with your knight is your main idea in these lines. And then the last variation I want to show you, which I think is the best option for black. So if you want to defend against Italian with black, you probably should play bishop to e7. That's also, I think, the grandmaster most played move. Let me take a look. Yeah, the grandmaster most played move, bishop to e7. Bishop to e7, and here we can immediately play d4 as white, because of course this knight is not here, so there's no problem of capturing here. Takes with the knight. Here knight f6, of course. I think online you will also get knight takes a lot, but you can just recapture with the queen. So let's say knight here, knight to c3, castles. I would recommend just capturing here on c6 and damaging this pawn structure. You don't need to play this, but you can play this. Other moves that are possible are also bishop to f4. But this is kind of your chance to damage the pawn structure if you want to go that way. So you can choose playing that or playing bishop f4. I'm actually going to take a look at the masters database. The masters also play rook e1, h3. So there are many different lines here, but this is pretty solid from black. I would say you can always capture and then play bishop f4. Probably you will capture, and you can try to fight against this weak structure from black, but there's no immediate way to make a lot of progress. You can also play bishop f4, which I think is a nice move, because for example rook here, rook goes in, let's say bishop, well bishop can actually not go there, let's say bishop, well bishop is hard to develop, maybe here, something like this, and some variations, even f3. And this position is pretty solid from white, but also from the black side. And this will be more of a strategic long-term battle. But this is one of the least played variations from black, and I think it's one of the best. You don't have to worry playing against this as white. You just have pretty simple plans, but you don't have any immediate tactics or amazing attacking plans. I'll show you what to do in the Italian game if your opponent plays the 2-knight defense. And the 2-knight defense happens when black plays both knights to c6 and f6. And we get to this position after the moves e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, Italian game, and then knight to f6 by black. And the first thing I have to say here is we are going to continue with the move d3, which is a really standard plan that we have here as white in the Italian game. Later on, you're going to castle and probably try to break open this center at some point. If black plays bishop c5 here, that will transpose to a different line that we have already covered in the previous video. So in this line, we're not going to take a look at that. Also, bishop e7 is rather passive, will probably transpose to the Paris defense at some point. In this video in particular, I'm going to show you what to do if black goes for this plan with knight f6, knight c6, and then the pawn push to d5. Which is the most common plan for black in the 2-knight defense, except for, of course, the lines that we have already seen in this Italian game video series. So what to do against this pawn push to d5? There are many really interesting lines you can use against this. The first thing is, of course, black is attacking both our bishop and our pawn, so the best thing we can do here is to just capture them. Because if you were to move back your bishop, all of a sudden you would be in trouble here. After takes, and then black can take here, and we lose our right to castle. So we're going to capture this pawn ourselves, and black will recapture with the knight. And then this is going to be the starting position, and the black player here has a couple of options. We are always going to castle as white, and the main idea with white is to play rook e1, put pressure here on this pawn on e5, and then also in many lines push d4, sometimes c3 and d4. And white really wants to just try and win this central pawn on e5, and we can actually win this pawn in many different variations. And we are going to take a look at 4 different lines for black. The first one, after black plays bishop g4, which is actually not such a good move, but it is the most common move you will face in this variation. If black plays bishop to g4, I recommend immediately attacking the bishop, and as usual in the Italian game, if black chooses to trade, well, you can just capture with the queen. And that's usually not so good for black, because our queen gets active. We suddenly have pressure here on the center. Probably the knight has to go back. And then here still we can attack the central pawn. It's hard for black to defend this. Maybe a move like bishop d6. And then in many lines you will be able to use the fact that your queen is on this diagonal together with your bishop to create some sort of trade. And then later on try to win this pawn in the center. For example, after castles, takes, and then you can take here as well. So you never really have to worry about the lines where black captures. That's not really such a good line for black. Most people will not capture. About 1 in every 2 games. 1 in every 2 games, yeah, you will get bishop to h5, dropping back the bishop. And against this line there are so many nice tactics and traps you can apply as white. We are immediately going to go for rook e1, and you can see the speed of this opening here. We have a developed bishop, developed knight, rook on the open file, the king is still stuck in the center, and we will have some attacking chances here. And basically we are attacking this e5 pawn twice, once with the knight and once with the rook, and black has to go and defend this. And there's not really an easy way for black to do so. There are many different lines black can do. The most popular here is pawn to f6, which immediately loses the game. So just to show you, black doesn't really know what to do here in these lines quite often. Pawn to f6, the most popular, immediately loses the game. Why? Well, because we have knight takes e5. And we are basically sacrificing the queen. And if black captures our queen, we have knight takes c6. And this is also a check by the rook. So the king has to move. It's not possible to capture the knight, of course, because this is check by the rook. king has to move, we can take the queen, take, and then here white is just up a full piece. A full piece, and still the position is pretty damn bad for black as well. This is also still hanging, the king is still in the center, so just devastating for black. And this is the most played line. Of course, if black tries to recapture, for example with the f pawn, you can just take this with check, also really devastating. If they play something like g6, I was gonna say here you can actually capture with the rook if you want, sacrificing the rook temporarily, and then we are gonna win back here the material. So really devastating line. Black shouldn't play pawn to f6, but it's the most played variation. The second most played variation is bishop d6. This doesn't work because you just get a free knight. But just to show you, all of these lines are pretty bad for black, and about 1 in every 2 games here, black will play either f6 or bishop d6, and it's going to be immediately game over. Some other moves, black can always play, for example, bishop c5, but they are just dropping the pawn here again, because they cannot capture our queen, otherwise we would get this check again. So it's always the same system, the same set of moves that we can apply. And I think probably one of the more decent options for black is to just play this bishop to e7, because well, right now we cannot capture this, because otherwise we would lose our queen, and we don't really have any tricks with the check because the bishop is blocking. So this is a high level way of defending, basically saying I don't need to defend this because you cannot capture it with the knight. In this line we're just going to go all in. We're going to play g4, kicking away the bishop, and then we're going to capture the free pawn, most likely get a trade. And as white, you're just up a full pawn in this position. You also have pressure on the central knight, so white has to do something to defend it. You can take, knight c3, again putting up an attack. Black still hasn't castled yet, so probably black will have to castle, and then you can take here in the center as well. And as white, you are already up 2 pawns in this variation, and this bishop e7 line is actually one of the better lines for black. So this is what happens after your opponent plays this early bishop to g4. Next up, we're going to take a look at the second most popular move in this exact position, and that is bishop to e6 by black. So this is the second most popular move. Also a pretty bad move for black. Here we're just going to go for the same tactics. Rook to the e-file, we're going to put pressure. We are immediately threatening here to win this pawn. So black has to do something about it. Probably they will defend with bishop to d6. I gotta say, pawn to f6 also is sometimes played, but pawn to f6 is always devastating for black. Here we just have the move pawn to d4 for putting more pressure on the center. And of course, if black is to take here, they are now losing the bishop, so black cannot capture. We basically have extra threats here. We can play the queen up, put more threats on this file, and some lines will also play the bishop here. For example, this. And all of this is pretty devastating for black. So f6, never a good move. If black plays this, they will always be losing rather quickly. Bishop d6 is a decent approach here, trying to just be safe in the center. But we're going to go all in, push pawn to d4 and start an attack here in the center. And again, 1, 2, 3 attackers and only 2 defenders by black, the bishop and the knight. So black has to do something. Black can capture. Black sometimes also just castles and doesn't care. They just lose the pawn. That's also possible. If they want to save it, probably they have to capture us. But that is also losing, because we now capture this knight. And all of a sudden, well, you can see black is in a lot of trouble here, because this is pinned and they are just down a full piece. So really bad position for black. The most played move is actually capturing here, which blunders the knight. The second most played is castles, which gives away the pawn. Sometimes you can also get this move pawn to f6 again, but that's usually not a good line, especially if you just play bishop here to b5, pinning the knight. Let's say, for example, black castles. You have a move like c4, attacking the knight has to move back, and then you can often play c5 or d5, and both of these are winning material. So that is also often a trick against the f6 lines, is to move your bishop and then play c4 and then c5 or d5, and the black pieces are just way too cramped in the center and there are forks lying around everywhere. So this bishop to e6 move here by black, not a good move in this position, but it's one of the most common ones. Then we will continue here again in our main line. We capture, and then bishop to c5, which is a bit similar to other lines we have covered in different Italian games videos. Bishop to c5 is the third most popular move. And again, we're just going to go for the same idea. This is really easy to play with white. We are going to play rook to e1, putting pressure here on the center. If black castles, which is the most popular move, we just win this pawn for free. If they don't want to give us the pawn, what do they have to do? Maybe they could try a move like f6. f6 defending the center, but we have the move d4, breaking up everything. We are attacking here, we are attacking the bishop. And if black were to capture, well, they would just be losing a full piece because this is pinned. And even after this exchange, black is just completely lost. So pawn to f6, as I said, this almost never works as a defensive measure. Maybe they could try to go for the bishop g4 line here, but this is pretty similar to the earlier lines we have seen with bishop g4. We're going to play h3. If they capture us, we're going to capture with the queen. And if they move back, they are immediately losing again because of knight takes e5, bishop takes, check, and this is exactly what we have seen before as well. So bishop g4 never helps. Pinning this knight doesn't help. Bishop c5, not a good move, because d4 is still possible since this is pinned as well. The best option for black is probably just to exchange this, but now again, a lot of problems for black here. This knight is under attack. The knight probably just has to move back to f6. Then we are playing bishop here. Oops, for example, castles, not the king slide, but castles. Takes, this is falling, and black's position is just collapsing. So again, black's just pretty devastatingly lost in all of these lines. And then we're going to take a look at the fourth most popular option, and I think this is probably the best option for black, and that is to play really early on bishop e7. And the reason a move like bishop e7 is so strong here is simply because bishop e7 blocks this file for the rook. So many of these tactics with an early d4 push or winning materials somehow, somewhere, all of that doesn't really work because the pin does not exist. But we're going to go for rook e1 anyways. And the most popular move here is bishop to g4. Of course, there are other possibilities. Castling is also possible, which is played a lot, but I mean, black just loses a pawn. Yeah, sometimes you get f6, but against f6, again, we're going to push pawn to d4. For example, after takes, and this is really not looking so great for black. The knight can jump in here. If they capture us, we're going to capture with the queen. We have double pressure here. We have a developed rook on the e file. I mean, black is just extremely lost. f6 always loses. Sometimes maybe bishop f6, a little bit crazy. There's bishop zigzag, but it is possible. Again, now you can play d4 because this file is open, maybe castles, and then you win this pawn as well. So many different lines for black, most of them losing. Bishop g4 is the most common approach, which is understandable because black wants to basically eliminate his knight so that we cannot capture here in the center. And again, bishop g4, we're always going to play this move, pawn h3, attacking the bishop. If they move back or if they take, well, we can take with the queen. This knight is under attack, probably knight f6, bishop b5. If they just castle, again, they are just losing, takes, this is falling, we have seen this before. If black defends, this is probably the best defense, defending both at the same time. Black is still losing. Bishop takes, queen, and then the rook takes in the center. So it's impossible almost for black to keep up the material here, and black will almost always lose something. So capturing here, again, is losing for black. The best approach is probably bishop to h5, then we play g4 again. This is our standard tactic, and here black also loses the pawn in the center. And that's just it. I mean, there basically isn't any real defense for black that doesn't lose any central pawns, and white's gonna get an easy game, always up a pawn, and after you win the pawn, you can just start developing your pieces to natural squares, and you will have a good time. At least you're up a pawn, and sometimes you can go even crazier with this f4, f5 push if you want. Of course, be careful for your own king safety as well. And as I said, if black plays any other moves in this opening, for example, bishop here, pawn to d6, you should definitely check out my other videos on the Italian game, because I'm trying to cover every single line. I cannot cover everything in one single video, so I'm gonna make this into a big series of Italian game. That's it. If you enjoyed this, definitely subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.